Hello, everybody. Can everybody please? Thank you, guys. So here it is, the event that we have all been waiting for. Tonight, we are going to be debating the question, is Christianity true? Are you guys excited? So hello, everybody, and welcome to the Christian Union and Monash Philosophy Society debate on the question, is Christianity true? We are so excited to have you guys with us tonight in person and those watching from home online. And we just really hope that tonight is a great opportunity to think, talk and learn with each other about both sides to this really big question. We hope tonight is an opportunity to hear about views that we might not have heard before, ask questions that have been on our minds, and of course, enjoy the evening. My name is Georgia. I'm a committee member here at Christian Union, and I'll be our MC tonight. Tonight, we are going to hear from our two hosts, Monash Christian Union and Monash Philosophy Society. As they debate our big question, is Christianity true? In this debate, as you may have guessed, Monash Christian Union will be the affirmative side, arguing that Christianity is true, and Monash Philosophy Society will be the negative side. We will have time for questions, so would encourage you to think of questions throughout the night. Maybe it's something that you heard that doesn't quite make sense. Maybe you want some more information. Or maybe there's a question that's been nagging you for a while. We want to hear them. There will be a QR code on the screen later in the evening. And for those in Zoom, there will be a link in the chat so that you can submit questions in there later in the evening when we have our question time. So we'll ask that you hold your questions until that point in the evening, and we would love to hear them and answer as many of them as we can then. We'll also be having an intermission at 7:20, so you can all have a bit of a break, stretch your legs, maybe have some conversations that time. It will just be a short break at 10 minutes. Now, without further ado, please welcome your speakers for the evening. And with that very warm welcome, tonight debating for Monash Christian Union, we have Patrick Grocott and we also have Daniel Riard. To get to know them, Patrick is a fourth-year mechanical engineering and commerce student, and Daniel is a third-year psychology student. Now, debating for Monash Philosophy Society, we have Noah Smith. And we also have Joel Law. Noah is a philosophy of religion student, and Joel is a second-year Bachelor of Law and Bachelor of Arts student. Please also welcome our moderator, Joash Arnold. Joash is now going to begin our debate.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I think seeing how many people here today shows us how important this question is. I'm really excited to see all of you turn out. Thank you for braving the awful weather to come and join us. I'm going to just be starting by laying down some of the ground rules for tonight's debate, so you get an idea of what's going to be happening. I've done a few of these debates before in moderating, and the main thing that I think is this is a debate which will be a lot of fun, but I think rules help us to treat each other with respect. One of the main ways that we can do that is having speakers stick to times. So we'll be having 12-minute opening statements from each side. We'll have 12, 12, 12, 12, so all speakers will get a shot. And then afterwards, we'll have a little bit more friction, where we have an open debate, a discussion, which will go for 25 minutes. And then we'll be having a time of intermission after that where you can get some tea and coffee, maybe talk to each other, wonder who's winning, who's arguing well, and then come back, because after that we're going to do another 25-minute discussion, and then the part that I'm sure you're all waiting for, the Q&A. One thing I do have to say, which is an indictment on these types of events, is that we won't be tolerating heckling. So please respect our speakers. They put a lot of effort into tonight's debate. They put a lot of time. And one of the best ways that you can honour that is by laughing when it's appropriate, but not yelling at times that it isn't. We do have campus security, and unfortunately, at other university events that has had to be used. I know and trust that won't be the case tonight. So those are some rules. I don't mean to be a wet blanket on this, but it will help us to have a good debate tonight. So again, without further ado, let me introduce the first speaker of the affirmative team, Patrick Grocott.
Good evening, you highly evolved pieces of pond scum, floating on a speck of dust through the universe, destined for a purposeless death. I don't really believe that. And neither, I think, to any of you. You know, if you did, you wouldn't be here tonight. You're here because you know that your life has meaning and you're wondering what that is. Or maybe you know what that meaning is, but you're just curious about what we have to say. Or maybe you just wanted to see the philosophers wipe the floor with the Christians. Well, the four of us are here tonight to answer this most important of questions. Is Christianity true? Let me remind you of the stakes. If Christianity isn't true, if the claims it makes about God and the universe and what happens when we die are false, then it's by far the biggest lie in history. I think our click is working now. But if it is true, it's the most important thing in the world. It has eternal repercussions and it means something. It means something for each of us. But if you came here for a sermon tonight, you'll be disappointed. You should come to our weekly meetings instead, Tuesday nights at 6. No. Tonight, you'll see Daniel and I approach this question from a standpoint of reason and argument, because we're convinced that there are better reasons and there are better arguments for Christianity than against it. Tonight, we'll defend two basic contentions. First, that God is real, and second, that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Now, whatever Christians might disagree on, all Christians agree on these 2 points. Now, if you leave this room tonight convinced of both, Daniel and I have succeeded in showing that Christianity is true. We'll defend these two contentions by showing that Christianity explains the facts of life and the facts of history better than any other system of belief. I'll consider the facts of life, experience, rationality, morality, and Daniel will consider the facts of history, facts that can only be explained by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So, let's consider the facts of life. And I'll begin by addressing a possible objection. Now, you might be asking, why are we even here? Come on, we don't need religion. Science explains everything. Does it? Let's seriously consider this. Broadly speaking, you can have one of two world views. The first is called naturalism. It's the belief that the physical realm is the only reality. And the second is called supernaturalism. This is the belief that, there is a world outside of this world. Physical matter doesn't exist by itself. There's something more. My first goal tonight is to show you that naturalism is false, that it's inconsistent with what we observe, and that the facts of life demand the existence of some higher power. So let's return to that objection. Doesn't science explain everything? It does. It does. It does, but only if you preemptively define everything as what's physically observable. Science is the study of physical phenomena, or in other words, science presupposes naturalism. So it's powerless to say whether naturalism is true or not. To dismiss the possibility of something supernatural on the basis of the scientific method alone, well, that's actually a logical fallacy. That's a circular argument. Science does not contradict the supernatural. Now, someone might say, well, maybe I can't rigorously prove it, but naturalism explains the world better than everything else. Does it? The fact is, we all hold a number of beliefs that are perfectly rational, yet perfectly contradictory under naturalism. Let me give you one example, the belief in free will. The naturalist believes that every event is entirely caused by some previous event, all in our physical world. Nothing happens independently. Each event is a bit like a billiard ball, which only moves when it's struck by another ball. Thus, and I want you to catch this, an honest naturalist cannot believe in free will, because that would mean human beings have the power of independent action. No, under naturalism, every single decision you made today, to cheat on your test, to not cheat on your boyfriend, was just part of a vast chemical reaction set in motion long before you were born. So how could you have any effect on that? You're just chemicals. You're just a part of that reaction. No, an honest naturalist has to admit that free will and choice is an illusion. There's no one holding the pool cue. So what's wrong with this? So what? I am just atoms. My emotions are just chemistry. Free will is just an illusion. Well, you might believe that way, but do you behave that way? Of course not! When you wake up in the morning, it's not, oh, Mum, I'm so glad that you're generous towards me and you're compelled to be that way because of evolution. In fact, that gladness in itself, I know that's also an illusion. In fact, all my beliefs, including my belief in naturalism, is completely irrational because it's the neurochemical equivalent of a coin flip. No, we don't believe this way. So we don't behave this way. We shouldn't believe this way either. So tonight, when I say God, or Daniel says rise from the dead, and you feel yourself thinking, God doesn't exist, and miracles don't happen, simply because those things are supernatural, I want you to check yourself, right? God might not be real. Miracles might not happen. But if you dismiss the possibility of those things simply because they're supernatural, you're not being logical. You're actually taking a step of blind faith. Now, don't mistake me. I haven't yet said that Christianity is true, and we're not there yet. All I've said is that naturalism is unlivable and self-contradictory. There must be something more. But perhaps you're unconvinced, right? There may be something more, but I haven't given you any reason why that something needs to be the God that Christians worship. Well, in 5 minutes, let's do just that. This next argument is very easy to follow. It has 2 premises, 2 facts, which lead unavoidably to the conclusion. You ready for the facts? You're not ready. We'll go home. That's right, we'll do it another night. Are you ready for the facts? Yes, excellent. Fact number 1. Fact number 1, objective morals exist. Fact number 2, objective moral values can't exist without God. Conclusion, God exists. Let me be really clear. You are free to disagree with these facts, but if you agree with 1 and you agree with 2, the conclusion's inescapable. So let's start with fact number 1. Objective moral values exist. Have you ever used the phrase, that's just not right? Or, she's a good person, or so-and-so is wrong? Of course, we all have. And when we do, we're making a moral judgment. When we see on the news that a certain Eastern European country has invaded its neighbour, we can't help but think that is wrong. Not wrong in my own eyes, just wrong. So you see, we're all objective moralists, even if we don't use that label. Consider the statement, it's wrong to eat people. Hands up who thinks cannibalism's wrong. Okay, a few of us. Okay. Remind me to leave once the snacks run out. What if the cannibal thinks it's okay? Does that change anything? No. This is a moral standard that exists independently of that individual. If someone thinks cannibalism is good, we don't throw out the moral standard. We conclude that that person is just, well, there are many things, but one of those things is mistaken. And then we stop being friends with that person. Now, if my opposition were allowed to interrupt here, I think they would say, not so fast, Patrick. Different cultures have different moral values. Therefore, there can be no objective moral truth. but here's why they'd be wrong. Firstly, the conclusion just doesn't follow the premise here. Just because some people disagree on morality doesn't mean that no one is right. One cannibal doesn't make cannibalism okay. 7 billion cannibals doesn't make cannibalism okay. Hope we agree on that one. Secondly, this line of argument has some pretty unacceptable conclusions. Right? If morals aren't objective, then by what standard are we judging a Mongolian warlord from the 1200s, or a German chancellor from the 1900s, or an American president today? Now, under moral relativism, all views are equal. And clearly, this is unacceptable. So the fact remains, objective moral values do exist. Fact number 2, objective moral values can't exist without God. Richard Dawkins says, "The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." Under naturalism, there is no good and evil, and I would challenge our opposition to say otherwise. Under naturalism, human beings aren't intrinsically valuable. The universe wasn't created by some intelligent being for some purpose. The Big Bang was an unguided process, and it follows that human beings, too, are nothing special. We're just cosmic accidents that happen to evolve from pond scum. Given this picture of the world, what basis, I ask you, is there for objective moral values? But belief in God makes perfect sense of our morality. Human beings do have intrinsic value because you and I were created by God. There is a universal moral standard, God's own standard of goodness, and reassuringly, there are consequences for good and evil. There is justice. Unlike naturalism, in which objective moral values seem strange and out of place, our objective morality is perfectly at home in a universe created by God. Therefore, in conclusion, if we know objective moral values exist, and we know that they depend for their existence on God, it follows that God exists. Our aim tonight was to show you that Christianity explains the facts of life and the facts of history better than any other system of belief. On the facts of life, we saw that naturalism ends in self-contradiction. It's not livable. And I also presented the moral argument. Using simple logic, we can see that objective moral values necessitate a personal God. Using the facts of life, I've defended our first contention. And soon, Daniel will defend our second contention with the facts of history. But first, our opposition will speak. And they must present a different system of belief which explains these facts better than Christianity. They must have some worldview on which to stand if they wish to critique Christianity. If they wish to call Christianity irrational, fine. But I hope they can explain how rationality can arise from random physical processes. If they wish to call Christianity evil, they may. But I hope they define evil beforehand. I believe there are good arguments for Christianity and no good arguments against it. Can our opposition prove me wrong on either count? Let's find out. Thank you for your time. Yeah, sure.
Hello? Hello? Am I audible? Okay. All right. Well, first off, thank you all for coming. We're, as a team, not going to take our full time just because I don't think we need it and we'd prefer to get to the discussion. But I think there's a clarification that needs to be made here because as we saw in the argument presented, the word God for each of us has a meaning, but that's not really necessarily what these arguments directly indicate. There is a distinction here between deism and theism. You can say that there are objective morality, there's a source of objective morals. You can say that the universe was created by something. You know, common arguments for this are uncaused causers, unmoved movers, the argument from design, all sorts of these arguments. The issue here is that when we try to extrapolate these arguments into saying this is the God of Moses, this is the God of Christianity, these arguments don't really support that. So one, we don't have to accept deism as a principle. There are alternative explanations. And two, even if we accept deism as the explanation, there must have been a creator. Carl Sagan can say it better than I ever could, which is to say that if you want to use God as an explanation for the creation of the universe, you have to ask the next question: where did God come from? And if you want to say that that's an unanswerable question, why not save a step and say that the origin of the universe is an unanswerable question? And if you want to say that God is eternal, then why not save a step and say that the universe is eternal? I'm not going to go through every argument, but the point is that any argument you can give to God's existence, you can apply just directly to the universe. And again, although it's not directly relevant, it's not lost on me that the appeal to cannibalism makes no mention in the Ten Commandments, but we'll leave that aside. Also, even in an appeal to objective morals, you have to establish how God creates this objective set of morals. And oftentimes this dilemma is posed in certain ways, but the question is whether or not you're saying that there's an objective force of goodness that God merely arbitrates with us, as in there's goodness, and God knows what goodness is, and he translates that information to us. Or if what we say when we mean God is good or God is the source of goodness, whether we're really just saying that what's good is what God likes, and what God likes is good. Now, we can go into why that's circular and why that doesn't really make a whole ton of sense. But the point is, if you want to say that God is real and you want to use the arguments put forward, they don't indicate the Christian God any more than they indicate Islam, any more than they indicate Zeus, any more than they indicate Hinduism. They all end up fundamentally hollow and not indicating anything close to the Old Testament or the God of Moses. If you want to say that objective morals exist, I welcome you to argue that and present that. If you want to argue explicitly that naturalism requires determinism, that's also something I'm sure you'll expound on. But yeah, deism is not theism. Objective morals don't indicate the God of Christianity. So I'll leave it at that.
Hello everyone, good evening. My name's Daniel, and I've just got to say, what a wonderful blessing it is to be here today and just see you all. It's just incredibly, incredibly wonderful. And genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, it means a lot. But so we began tonight by robustly defending two basic contentions. One, that God is real, which Pat was defending, and two, that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, which I'll be defending tonight. But before I do this, I would love to answer some of our opponent's objections to this. And so our opponent objected with one main point and a couple others, but the first main point was that, well, how does deism lead to theism? There seems to be a gap in your reasoning to where you cannot conclude that there is a God of Christianity. And my response to that is, well, that was only Pat's objective, that God is real, that there is a God. He wasn't trying to say that Jesus Christ is God. That's going to be my contention. and fair enough. And additionally, I'm going to answer his other objections during the open discourse, like the Euthyphro dilemma, which he put forward. And yeah, I would just love to, but I just for the sake of time, yeah. And I ask you for future, just next time, Pat just presented a whole case against naturalism, but I didn't hear many cases against that. So just for future, thank you. Anyways, all right, let's get on. Come on, slide. All right. All right, now Christianity's truth, founded upon Jesus' resurrection, isn't just some fairy tale, as you see up there, or some flying spaghetti monster fantasy of blind faith, but rather a powerful worldview that's built on a solid structure of fact after fact after fact. And now I'm going to be using established historic evidence agreed upon by the vast majority of not laymen, not random people ranting on the internet, but rather secular scholars like this guy on the topic of Jesus Christ and his resurrection. But before I throw a bunch of facts at you, some of you might already be asking, well, why does it matter if Jesus really rose from the dead? Well, I'm going to answer that to you. If Jesus was a real person who claimed to be God, which he was, and confirmed this by rising from the dead historically, this is an absolutely crucial reality for all of you. It completely confirms the truth of Christianity in of itself, basically because Jesus' resurrection is the evidence that we seek. There's also a really, really, really important implication to the resurrection of Jesus, but we'll talk about that after. Now that we know why it's important, at least for the most part, let's get on to the facts. I'll explain the approach. The approach of today is called the minimal facts approach. Basically, we're using 4 historic facts of the resurrection agreed upon by nearly even the most adamant atheistic scholars in the entire world to thus demonstrate the resurrection being a historic reality that happened in history. Once again, 4 historic facts. Starting with fact number 1, Jesus is real and was crucified. Fact number 2, the followers saw him rise and believed this to their death. Fact number 3, murderer and skeptic Paul to adamant believer with the resurrection encounter of Jesus. And finally, fact number 4, the empty tomb of Jesus. Well, now the first point, once again, agreed upon by nearly every single scholar, is that Jesus Christ is a real person in history and that he died by crucifixion. We also have sources from so many people in this time which continue to attest to the fact that he was absolutely real and died by crucifixion, to where even an Aussie New Testament scholar named John Dixon said that if you can find me a professor on the topic of Jesus Christ and the resurrection, he'll even eat a page out of his Bible. Now, that is how confident we are, but please don't eat any Bibles today. Leave it for snack time. We've got a couple of bananas up there. We'll steal them. But anyways, we also have sources from just so many different people which continue to attest to this. And fact number 2, not only did he just live and die, but the hundreds of disciples whom followed him believed this. We have historic documentation, and every scholar in the field agrees to this fact that his disciples believed that he lived, died, and rose. And now you might be thinking to yourself, well, big whoop. Who cares if they believed he died and rose? They're just his disciples. They're his followers. Well, I personally care. It's not big whoop. But no, actually, it's a really, really, really important fact. And the reason why is because this wasn't just some random game of Chinese whispers. And it's like, did you know this? And yeah, that Jesus. No, it wasn't that. They saw the risen Jesus and changed their life as a response to that. Hundreds of people not only claimed to see the risen Jesus, but on multiple occasions, they ate with him, they sat with him and enjoyed his company. So it wasn't just a one-off event. And not only that, they were changed. They went from being timid, scared, and cowardly followers to boldly proclaiming Christ at the cost of everything. They even had opportunities to recant. They could actually said, "Nah, I was lying about that Jesus stuff," and avoided their deaths. But they didn't. None of them did, actually. They literally died on the belief that Jesus was God, according to what they saw, according to their experiences, and according to their lives. And let's say, for instance, you really didn't believe something, or perhaps lying. Well, if you didn't believe something or were lying about the fact with no gain in mind, that would be the most illogical thing in the entire universe. And same with the disciples. They wouldn't die for a lie. So I ask you to consider, why did these disciples go from timid, cowardly, and scared to boldly proclaiming Christ unto their deaths? What is the best explanation for these facts of history? And not only do we have them dying for their faith, but in fact number 3, we have a historic man named Paul. And this man, I don't know if you guys know Paul, but this man was filled with hatred and indignation towards Christians. In fact, he started murdering a lot of them because of how wrong he thought they were. And then one day, as he was going about killing Christians on Damascus Road, he had an encounter with the risen Jesus, and his whole life flipped in a 180-degree fashion. He went from hating Christians to becoming one of the world's most prominent Christians, having written a big portion of the Bible. Once again, unanimous agreement by scholars that Paul was both an unbeliever and a hater of Jesus to now loving him after the resurrection encounter. And now I ask you, logical ones, what is the best explanation for these facts? Can someone have had their lives completely flipped upside down for a lie? I don't think so. And finally, we have the empty tomb of Jesus. After Jesus rose, we have a huge boulder which was placed in front of the tomb, gone, moved. Then we have the body of Jesus missing while Roman soldiers were apparently guarding it. And we know the disciples of Jesus, the followers of him, didn't roll it away because when they came to the scene, it was already gone. And so I just want to ask you, if we know the disciples didn't do it, if we know the people of the time didn't do it, and the Romans were guarding the tomb of Jesus, how was it moved? What best explains the empty tomb? And I would say what best explains the empty tomb is Jesus, is his resurrection, because he was God, and ultimately not only his resurrection, but because Christianity is true. Now, in summary, we've made a strong and compelling case we've made a strong and compelling case that Christianity is true, formulated from our 2 basic contentions. 1, that God is real, which Pat talked about, and 2, that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, which I talked about, as you guys know. And the way that Pat established that God is real, as you remember, is both through pointing out that naturalism is false and not a livable way to explain reality, but also through showing objective moral values point to an objective God in the universe. And so I personally, as you just saw, went through 4 independent facts. 1, Jesus is real and was crucified. 2, the followers saw him rise and followed it to their death. 3, the murderer and skeptic Paul went from murderer and skeptic to adamant believer. And finally, Jesus's empty tomb. And so I just want to come before you today and ask, what do you think best explains all these facts? I think all these facts, all these different points of evidence point to the fact that Christianity is true through the resurrection of Jesus. So yes, to that question. All right, but now let's go on to something important, something very, very important. What do we do now? Now that we've demonstrated the reality of Jesus and the capacity of supernatural events through this debate, why did Jesus die is the prevailing question. Why did the God of all the universe die on a cross? This is important. Oh, apologize for that one. The reason for this is that God is just. He wants justice to prevail in all the world, as we showed, through morality, which he instituted from himself. And he set a law and a standard for us to follow. And things like don't lie, don't steal, don't lust, don't hate. However, although God has set a moral standard, all of us have broken that standard. And God, being a just judge, has to punish us for breaking his moral standard like you would in any typical court of law. And so our punishment for what we've done is death. But Jesus, our perfect God, died in our place. He took the punishment we rightly deserved so that we can go free. And this isn't some myth. This isn't something we just made up, but this is grounded in a historic reality from Jesus' resurrection. And now this historic Jesus says to us rebels that we have an opportunity to be saved, to know him, love him, and enjoy him forever. And not only will you go to heaven, but you will have a right relationship with the God of all the universe, a new hope, a new joy, and a new peace in him. And he says we must believe in him as God with all the evidence we have and trust in him as the one who took our punishment on the cross legally and turn from our old ways of rebellion against his law and come and follow him in submission. And so this is a message of hope and goodness and beauty, and ultimately truth we've demonstrated today. Thank you very much. Sorry? Yep.
I'm going to directly answer the two questions that were quite intelligently posed by our learned friends from Monash Christian Union. And the first thing I want to do is address the direct question of whether or not God does exist. Because I think they never really responded to the claim, or whatever they've presented so far doesn't quite answer the very question that Noah tells you about, right? When Noah tells you that, look, an objective morality is, or whether or not you can prove it, is divorced from the entirety of the claim that Christianity provides the truest version or the most objective moral source. It tells us, they at best prove to us that there are disagreements within morality, but it may not necessarily mean that there is no one monopoly of truth on what real good and morality actually looks like. Right? So they actually haven't really done the necessary work to prove that objective morality even exists, firstly, but secondly, that somehow comes from God. But more importantly, what I would suggest to you is that actually morality is something that can exist independently of God. I think it's quite unfortunate that a lot of people believe that they can't otherwise be good people unless they subscribe to a structure that prescribes certain moral teachings. Because we know for a fact that systems of morality have existed for millennia, even before the rise of any organized religion. And in this debate, the question is whether or not organized religion in the form of Christianity specifically, whether that is true or false, or true or not. And so therefore it requires the MCU side to really tell us why exactly we should believe that morality cannot possibly have existed without the existence of Christianity. That, by the way, has only existed in the past 2,000 plus years or so. This suggests to us that civilizations before that somehow did not have any source of objective morality, right? But we know for a fact that those societies continue to exist and persist in today's world as well, right? And that's the reason why we think a lot of what they've proven does not disprove that objective morality, does not prove that, they do not prove that objective morality is something that exists. But they then fail to make the claim very concretized when they suggested that there was a causal link, that somehow because we thought or we could know what is good, therefore it meant that there was a perfect creator out there that was able to create the source of morality to which our moral intuitions draw from. And I would suggest to you that that's probably something that is just not true. If you look at it this way, our moral intuitions about how to live is largely social engineered. But the question here is whether or not it's social engineered. Like, is it something that's an innate trait of being a human? My suggestion is yes, we probably are programmed because of evolution. Like, the reason why we are one of the most well-organized species and we are the most effective at optimizing whatever resources we have, despite our small size relative to every other species out there, despite our low reproduction rate compared to every other species out there, we really have persisted quite a bit because of our ability to over millennia have selection pressures on us to basically force us to rethink how we organize our society. And morality is that it's not an invention of a perfect creator out there, ladies and gentlemen. It is a creation, an ongoing process of negotiation and reconciliating ideas within a social compact. And that is what necessarily created morality before the existence of Christianity 2,000 years ago. So I would suggest to everyone here that it is probably not so true that it comes from God, because the reality there is, it implies that Christianity has a monopoly on what is good. But it's unclear how they've proven that. And I suspect that they are not going to try to do that, because in the vast majority of cases, that implies an exclusionary rhetoric that necessarily undermines other organized religions. So I think that would be unstrategic for them to basically run that line of argument. But the second thing I want to point out in terms of whether or not Jesus existed and whether or not he performed any miracles, what I want to point out here is a number of things. The first thing to point out here is that if you look at the universe right now, it's unclear why we have an intelligent designer. If you look at the universe, we have billions of planets. It seems a bit wasteful that an intelligent designer has basically created one Earth in the middle of an infinite galaxy, basically. And that seems like a bit of a waste, given that he's made all of that inhospitable of carrying any sort of life, right? So an intelligent designer, the intelligent designer argument seems a bit strange to me, because it unfortunately reveals that there's not a lot of efficiency behind that purported intelligent design. But more crucially, what I would go into here is that they can't just prove Jesus existed, because this is about the Son of God, right? This is about whether or not the fruit of his teachings were necessarily the truth. And I would suggest to you that we should apply the test that Jesus himself told his apostles and the people who he preached to. What sets Christianity apart for him, or what he was teaching, apart from everything the Pharisees were doing, was to look at the fruit of the teachings. And at that point, the rhetoric was clear, right? He pointed out the Pharisees' hypocrisies and the way they've mismanaged Jewish society, right? And he pointed out all those things. And he was like, yeah, that kind of sucks. What I want to point out there is that's something that is a test that applies directly to Christianity as well, right? Yes, there are some people that live good lives under Christianity, but for the vast majority of people, especially people that have left the faith, do not. And that is a tough, inconvenient truth that has to be contended with, right? If it is true that what Christianity presents is objective morality, then we don't see why there was so much attempts to cover up within the Catholic Church when it came to pedophilia. But more importantly, I would suggest to you that just because Jesus had followers doesn't prove that he's the Son of God. Just because people upended their lives and sent themselves across Europe to spread the word of God doesn't mean that Jesus is real or that he's the Son of God, right? Because guess what, guys? Trump supporters do that too. That is exactly how the QAnon Capitol riots occurred. People upend their lives because of misinformation all the time. It is called in the US, it's called self-radicalization, right? And in this case, while people act on misinformation, yes, it's a natural part of human psychology because we are unfortunately imperfect. All right, so let's then discuss the idea of witnessing the crucifixion. And this is a very important part of Christianity that I think they've rightfully pointed out here, because it is true that, unfortunately, Christ was crucified and, massive suffering there, quite gory. But I would like to point out a number of things here. Firstly, being crucified does not mean that you're the Son of God. many people under all the Roman criminals were basically crucified. Yeah. The second thing I want to point out there is that when the tomb was empty, it did not prove that he resurrected. The claims of resurrection and the eyewitnesses of Jesus ascending to heaven and resurrecting were his followers. So to be perfectly clear, it is basically his followers saying that I saw him and we touched him. And then they decided to act on what they believed to be true to spread Christianity to the rest of Europe. I would point out here that that's something that if you apply today would seem a bit strange logically, right? So if Trump supporters had a genuine, honest belief that Hillary Clinton, they saw Hillary Clinton walk into the pizza store in the city of New York and basically literally went into a satanic cabal of child eating pedophiles. That does not mean what they saw was true, and surely it does not mean that Hillary Clinton is the second coming of Satan, right? In the same vein, I think that clearly applies by their own logic and by their own standards. So I want to be very clear, at the end of those two speeches and at the end of 24 minutes, they have only proven that we have moral intuitions, that we are capable of moralizing, but never really telling us why exactly our ability to moralize stems from that creator. Because we already told you quite clearly that objective morality is something that is negotiated over time. But Noah additionally responded to that very early on by explaining that isn't central to the discussion. What they need to be able to prove is that Jesus is the Son of God and he did, in fact, perform the miracles and, came back from the dead. And the unfortunate reality there is that I don't think that they've necessarily done that after 24 minutes. So at the end of this, what I would like you to take away is simple. Firstly, that the intelligent designer argument seems a little bit strange, right? Because by their own logic, it seems that this intelligent designer has created a very inhospitable universe, and doesn't really seem to get anywhere with handling life in general. But the second thing I would want to point out there is that at the end of the day, when you're looking at moral intuitions, there are a wide variety of reasons as to why people are able to be good people, including agnostic and atheist people, because we just believe that in this case, it's bad to harm someone. We don't like seeing people suffer because their suffering triggers a primitive instinct on our end to be more defensive. We want to seek and reach out to those things. By the way, altruism is not an element that's unique to human beings. Animals have altruism too, like dolphins especially. All these are cases of unexplainable altruism. It doesn't mean that we are somehow created in the image of God and therefore created with the moral intuitions that God necessarily has, right? And it's for those reasons, at the end of the day, I think, God's probably not real, Christianity is probably not true, and yeah, that's it.
Thank you to speakers. So we're going to enter a time now of open discussion, where both sides will be able to cross-examine, interrogate the other side. Please stay tuned, and again, even more so, please be respectful through this. I know it's very heated, it's very emotional, but let's try to start off. I might kick off the questions, and then I'd love for the speakers to just be interacting, and I'll try to step back. My first question for the Christians is, do you believe that, I think something that Joel pointed out was, do you believe that there are other methods for explaining morality apart from God?
Yeah, so in the answer here, I'll make a distinction between a couple of things that we might mean when we talk about morality. So, for example, we talked about animals, they're altruistic, dolphins rescue people sometimes. Is that evidence of morality? So you can talk about moral convictions and you can talk about moral obligations. So a moral conviction or a moral belief is, I believe this is wrong. I choose to do this. I believe this is right. And a moral obligation is not just, I believe for myself, but I believe universally, objectively, it's wrong and right. So, for example, if someone tells me, hey, I'm a racist, what do you think about that? Now, I don't say, well, I believe racism is wrong for me, but maybe not for you. No, it's moral. That's moral obligation, right? And the point I'm making, and now to answer Josh's question, there are other ways of having morality other than a personal God? I give the answer, no moral obligation. Now, they gave the example of evolution perhaps as an explanation for where we derive our morality. And evolution, I didn't get time to address this in my talk, is something I actually cut. I was going to have the second objection to that second point I made, can't you have objective morals without God? Under evolution, you can have moral beliefs. I can do something because I believe it's right, but there's no objectivity to it. There's no way that I can say that someone from a different culture, as I said, Mongol warlord 1200s, I can't say this person is wrong objectively because I'm not in the same culture as them. If morality is cultural, there's nothing objective about it. So that's to answer your question, Josh. I had a question for.
Actually, we'll come back to this because you just mentioned that morality is objective under the view of Christianity, correct?
Correct.
Okay. How do you interpret that morality then from God? Is it through the Bible? Like, are you saying that the Bible is literal in that way?
Correct.
So you're saying the Bible is literal?
Broad word, but yes. So when Jesus says, I'd gather these people under my wings, Jesus doesn't have feathers. He's using a metaphor there. But literal as in, when it says, love your neighbor, it means love your neighbor. There it is literal. So it sort of depends on the style and the context.
So let me get this straight. So we have free will. You've said that, right?
Correct.
Yep. Okay. And you believe in a literal interpretation of the Bible, correct?
Correct.
Roughly. We'll go with roughly. Do you believe in any form of God's independence? Do you believe in that? Let me pull the verse out. Do you, and you can verify this, Isaiah 41:4 and Isaiah 40:13 through 14. In these passages, it's said by God that no knowledge of his comes from anything but him.
Sorry, which particular verse?
Isaiah 40:13 through 14.
You guys are looking this up? 41 through.
I'm expecting Bibles to come out in the audience as well. You're all welcome to verify. And then 41:4 Isaiah as well. While you're looking, I'll get to the point, which is if you want to say that basically we have free will, but nothing that God knows originates outside of him, and he's omniscient, it's implied that what we do already exists in him. And so in order for us to have free will, actually, I'm sorry, we can't have free will because the implication of that is that our actions don't influence his knowledge. He already knows what we're going to do before we do it. Therefore, in the free will sense that we could do otherwise, we can't. Everything's predetermined. God already knows. He's the source of our actions. And again, this is biblical. God says this.
So your basic objection is that God knows everything and foreordains things, and therefore there is no free will. And if I would ask you the question, how are you defining free will?
Well, I think it's generally recognized as the ability to do otherwise. But here, the issue with this is that if God is omniscient, he already knows what we're going to do, so we can't really do otherwise. Or if we were to do otherwise, he wouldn't be omniscient anymore because we would have done something he didn't know about. Is that fair to say?
Yep. So I think the answer to this question, I'll give you a bit of a spoiler. It's going to come down to the relationship between God and time in the end. So I'll just, summarizing. The issue is if God knows what we're going to do in the future, how can we have free will? Surely that means that God forced us to do that. That's what they're saying. Now, the reason why this isn't actually an objection to the existence of free will under Christianity is because God, knowing what's going to happen, doesn't actually have any bearing on us choosing. So if God were...
That doesn't apply with our doesn't apply with our knowledge not originate. That would apply if we could change God and if he didn't declare very clearly that his knowledge...
Yeah, this is in line with the verse is what I'm going to say.
So, but, okay, sorry.
Yeah. So if God were within us in this, let's say the same timeline, right? And God knew what we were going to do, and he said, I know you're going to do this. You could look at that and you'd say, I can't change that. Therefore, I don't have the free will. It's deterministic, right? There's no free will. It's deterministic. But if God, imagine him sort of we're on this sort of flat 2D plane, that's sort of our timeline. If God's up here looking down on it, he can see what we will do at each point. We still have the ability to choose it. He knows what we will choose, but we still choose. So God can know what we will choose without forcing us to do anything. And I might, Josh, you good? Yeah.
Feel free to jump over to
that. So just broadly, there's a lot of things that have been mentioned tonight.
So are you appealing to like a four-dimensionalist response here? Are you saying that God is outside of time?
Correct. And okay. I'll just make a point. I'll let you give your response, but just a broad, just comment on the framework of this free discussion. So number of comments made. We did a lot of writing, wasted a lot of ink, not wasted, killed a lot of trees. And I appreciate that they've given us a lot to work with. I'm going to enjoy this back and forth. Now, to go through it in a sort of structured way, broadly what we'd like to do, so the next question we will ask when we get an opportunity will be starting with the base,
with this one.
The foundation. Yep, I will. I'll get to yours. The base naturalism, because they made some points that how can you talk about, that doesn't point to God. It doesn't point to the Christian God. Yep. But we need that foundation in first before you can look at a moral argument. Then morality, that doesn't point to exactly, it could be Islam, could be some other world religion, correct. But you need that base before you suddenly look at, okay, Jesus Christ's resurrection. So just broadly, those three categories, we'll be structuring our responses in that way. And now I'd love to hear Noah's critique of my outside of time.
Okay, so I'm familiar with this because this is put forward by lots of philosophers. The issue with this is that works if we're just saying that God is omniscient, but he's outside of time. So actually, there's a temporal line, as in we conceive of past, present, future. But God, being outside of time, has everything in what has been described as an ever-abiding present. Everything's present moment to him. Your explanation makes sense until you read the Bible verses I pointed out to you, which states that all of God's knowledge has to originate within him. That means that you can't appeal to a causal chain, because if we are the source of his knowledge, that goes against this biblical interpretation. So again, you can appeal to omniscience and determinism and all these things. Those only solve the free will issue if you deny a literal interpretation of Isaiah 40:13 through 14 and 41:4, where it says that all of God's knowledge has to originate within him. You cannot have a causal connection between your actions and God's knowledge because all of his knowledge originates in him.
Okay. Just to clarify, the reason why I asked what's your definition of free will is because I have more of a free agency definition. I'm compatibilist personally, where God does ordain things, and he works in that way, but he does not force upon our will anything. So it's all our choice. But we cannot go beyond his will. So we still have choice. We still have ability. But your objection basically about God being the first mover, I don't think really conflicts with that compatibilistic.
The argument is that by these Bible verses, God is the only mover because all of our actions already exist in God before we do them. All of our choices, all of our even getting close to free will. What you're basically appealing to is that there's a temporal line as we see it, as in a cause and effect. But the issue here is that there can't even be a logical connection here because God's knowledge cannot depend on our actions because it has to reside in him, which is a biblical interpretation of the Bible. There's no possible way for you to rectify the fact that you want free will and the fact that God's knowledge it pre-exists us causally and temporally.
Yeah. So I'm just going to read out the verse and then wrap up our response, and then hopefully move on, because I'm seeing some yawns. Not because I don't think there's a response to this, but I think it's starting to get a bit technical, and it's something I'd love to chat with you guys afterwards when we've got time. But just reading out the verse 41:4. Who has performed and done this, calling the generations from the beginning, I, the Lord, the first, and with the last I am he. Look, I haven't had time to read the whole thing, but just looking at the verses above it, it doesn't say who has performed and done every single human act and will ever. It says this, referring to a particular act that I think God's been providing for Israel, or something to that effect. So I don't think this applies to human free will. I think you're misapplying it. So anyway, happy to get back to it.
Thank you for the discussion. Do you want to throw a question over to us now?
Yeah. Thanks. So just returning to that first point, I'm going to let these guys into, I guess you guys too, into our thinking a bit here. So we started off talking about naturalism because we wanted to show that, there is something more. You can't just say, the world is only physical. And the reason we did that is because if you approach history, looking at the historical evidence for the resurrection or for any miracle, assuming miracles are impossible, or at least so exceedingly rare you'd need incredible evidence for them, you won't find that evidence. You won't even find that evidence if you look at something in the present, let alone 2,000 years ago. So it's a fruitless endeavour to try to look at the four facts if you don't believe there's some supernatural to start with. So that's the point on naturalism, and building on that to the moral argument. So I will ask a question related to naturalism. Where was my question? Oh, down over here. All right. It's a two-part question. The first one I'll give you now, and then the second's a bit of a follow-up. The first one, so because it appears you have a bit of a naturalist position, do you believe choice is an illusion? That's the first question.
Well, I'm going to be honest. I didn't hear any indication from you that we have choice anyway. So, yeah.
Okay, I think what I want to quickly chime in with is the entire premise of original sin is deterministic, right? And the reason for that is because when you believe that that humans are inherently fallen creatures because of what Adam and Eve did.
So do you believe choice is an illusion?
You're basically saying that, humans are destined for moral depravity because of original sin. So there's a deterministic logic that flows within Christianity itself. So I would suggest that maybe I think when you're comparing the deterministic outcome of naturalism, I think it's good to consider that on the flip side, Christianity itself is very much based on determinism, not just with original sin, guys.
Joel,
the book of Revelation is also proves prophecies.
Joel, I might just cut you off. Not because you're doing really well, but I think he's got a follow-up question. So I think it's just a quick one. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then, so what is your view on free will? Correct?
Yeah, my view on free will is that I believe we do have free will. I do think we have free will, and the free will to say I choose to do something good is independent of an external influence. That's my point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wonderful. You got a follow-up?
Sounded to me, so I got a yes from Joel. I got a no from Joel. It's not an illusion. From Noah, I thought it was more of a. You said yes, this is an illusion, but I'll let you respond.
I have no statement.
Sure, no statement. Right.
I mean, if I was going to sit here and say that I know whether or not we have free will, or it would be nothing but arrogance from me.
Okay, so I'll give you both responses. So if free will is an illusion, which the point I was making is it's self-contradictory to believe that, because did you choose to believe that? Well, if you chose to believe it, you were forced into that. So yeah, so that's a self-contradiction. But no, if it's not an illusion, which is what Joel responded with. Well, if we live in a purely naturalistic world, if we're just atoms, chemicals, if our brain is just the sum total of chemicals in it, how did you bend that physical matter to your will, right? How do you choose something if there is no if it's only the physical, if you are only atoms, how are you bending those atoms?
Because we are not atoms that are just bended together. Obviously we are, but there's clearly an element of thought, right? And obviously having some ability to think doesn't prove that there's supernaturalism going on, right? It proves that there's a separate intangible part or dimension of the way we think and conceive ourselves and interact with the rest of reality, right? It does not prove that there's a supernatural dimension outside of this universe, and in it, God and whatever morality that comes from it. Can I just refocus the discussion a little bit and maybe ask you an important question? Because if we accept that the Bible is the source of objective morality, can I just check, do you believe that it is a complete source of morality? Because surely you can't pick and choose the rules that are stated within the Bible, right?
I will respond to that one. Will, promise. But before, I just want to checkpoint, like a bit of video game. So checkpoint, we're at the point where we have agreed with one another. We agree. Surprising. We agree there is something more than the physical, right? Joel talked about you're not just atoms, and you can dispute that I've claimed this, but I'm going to keep claiming it. We're not just atoms. You've claimed there's something more. Now, obviously, you don't believe it's a God, let alone the Christian God, but there is something more. Now to respond to your question. So just as I heard it, the point was, is the Bible a complete source of morality? And you talked about picking and choosing. So I expect the follow-up question is going to be, Noah flicks open, picks out a verse, and points to where...
Nope.
Okay, excellent. I'm being surprised. You?
Yeah, I'm surprised.
Like Bible's a complete source of morality?
Oh, yeah. But it depends on how you define.
Sorry, I feel if you got a follow-up question to that, is that right?
Well, yeah. So, look, there are 614 verses between Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Do you follow any of the rules that are in those 614?
Like I said, it depends on how you define it. I do think the Bible is our source of objective morality in when it talks about the moral law. But when it comes to the ceremonial law, like sacrifices and things of that nature, we say those were fulfilled in Christ. And so we don't follow all of the commandments in the Bible, and we follow the ones relating to how we should act on a moral basis, which a lot of Christians, well, nearly every Christian agrees upon.
So as a follow-up question, how many here are wearing clothes woven by more than two fabrics? All of you. Bad, evil, because all of you are violating a rule from Deuteronomy. It's not a ceremonial law. It's not about sacrifice, right? But what I want to point out there is, if you believe that the Bible is a complete and objective source of morality, then it cannot be that you cherry pick the parts that you want to interpret as merely ceremonial in practice or written for the Jews, and then basically be like, we will love thy neighbor, and that is the doctrine of morality we subscribe to from Jesus's words in the 4 gospel books. Because Jesus saying, love your neighbor, is the same refrain on morality that you see in any other religion as well that predates organized Christianity. In every other faith with like Buddhism and Hinduism, you always see those things, that same refrain anyway. So it cannot be said that Christianity is true on the basis of cherry picking and discarding those 614 ceremonial laws, and then saying that Jesus taught us to love our neighbor, and because he showed morality that way, he is the source of morality.
Thank you. Well, I think there's a severe misunderstanding of the ceremonial law and what it came to accomplish. I only gave sacrifice as one illustration of what it was, but it includes the woven fabrics, it includes all of this. And we have verses in the New Testament, like Peter's vision in the book of Acts, which talk about abrogation of those laws because of their fulfillment in Christ. And so I ask you, I don't think you really understand the issue at hand when it comes to these laws. And in fact, I think this is an irrelevant discussion because we haven't first established what is your basis for objective morality and why you disagree with it. So I would like to move on there, actually, because
I've got a question that I'd love to throw to them, because I think that's something that came out in Joel's talk. Do you believe that all other religions are false? I think that's something that Joel said was quite an exclusionary rhetoric. Is that right? Yeah. Do you believe that they are false?
Well, personally, yes. If Jesus's resurrection proved that he was God, and he said himself, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. That excludes all other religions based upon what they believe about God. Because if Jesus was God, none of them were God. Do you have any questions about that one?
Look, it's not that I don't understand the distinction between ceremonial rules and actual moral doctrine. I spent many years being a Christian. I was very active in the church. I was a youth worship leader. I was a cell group leader, things like that. My mom was a Sunday school teacher, for God's sake. But what I would point out here is that when you are discussing, the old covenant and the rules that exist within it, Paul calls it a yoke of slavery. But the reality there is, if those rules are not entirely made up of, are not substantive to the modern Christian interpretation and way of life of practicing morality, and if only what Jesus says makes sense, then it's very unclear why organized Christianity, not just Protestantism, where we really hold on to the belief that all these rules are a yoke of slavery and we've become pharisaical, right? Like, clearly, it's more than that, right? But the problem there is, like I've pointed out, the messages of altruism, of being loving and kind, predate Christ himself, and therefore proves that there is something that exists prior to that, which means to say your Hinduism, your Buddhism, they have different revelations of morality, right?
Yeah, question. Do you believe that last bit, I think that came in his talk, that Christianity existed 2,000 years ago? What do you make sense of that predating? Was there a God? What do you say to that?
Well, we don't deny that other people can love. I don't understand the objection. Although Christianity was probably founded in around like 20 AD or around that time frame, we don't say the people before that couldn't love, because we worship an eternal God who was there from the before time and will be there till the end. And so it's not really an objection to Christianity or even objective moral value. But before I go on, I'd like to ask you a question, if that's okay.
Make this the last one before our break. And then
sure.
Joel's answer.
Do you believe what Hitler did in Nazi Germany was wrong? Objectively. Yeah, I know you want the mic, but I'd love to ask it.
If we're going to go there, I'm going to bring up the fact that the Catholic Church was the first partnership with the Nazi government. I'm going to bring it up.
What is it?
I'm going to bring it up.
Daniel, I'll let you.
The first partnership with the Nazi government was the Catholic Church. Every fascist government, apart from maybe 2 or 3, the Catholic Church was a direct partnership. And I'll ask you, did the Catholic Church possibly have a verdict that said all Jewish people are convicted of the crime of killing Jesus Christ? Are you familiar with that?
We'll respond to that one after the break, but Daniel asked you a question.
Okay, yeah. Let's not go to the Hitler route.
Sorry. Just to answer, I think you made quite a brilliant response.
Sorry, did you ask your question?
I don't know if that. Yeah.
Daniel, you ask your question, and one of you guys can respond.
I just want to respond to the question that he originally posed for me, which is why the discussion on objective morality is important, because it is a cornerstone for, I think, Patrick's his first argument, which is basically not first or second argument about how there's an intelligent designer out there which has precisely fine-tuned the universe to have some moral direction, and therefore it's the source of moral direction. The point I'm trying to make there is that proving that objective morality exists does not mean that a God, and therefore the Son of Man, came down to Earth with the intention of saving the entire universe. There's a massive leap of logic there, which exposes the inherent gap in logic that resides in their case earlier.
So the answer was yes, it's objectively wrong, but it doesn't point to God. Checkpoint? Yes.
What's objectively wrong?
What Hitler did was objectively wrong.
Yeah,
you shouldn't have used Hitler.
That's what he said.
Doesn't point to God. Oh.
Excellent. On that very civil note, I do want to thank our debaters. We're gonna come back. It's not the end. I hope that maybe you're a little bit riled up and that you get to chat to each other. Just give me a second, guys. So we're going to come back here in about 10 to 15 minutes. There's a short break, pop to the toilet and get some tea and coffee and come back, and we'll start at 8 o'clock on the dot. Shh. As a warm and sincere thank you for returning. It looks like we had a pretty good hit rate. People have come back. So thank you to the speakers for capturing everyone's attention. We're going to do that again. One, I think because it's funny and fun and good to watch. But two, I think the speakers had things that they would like to keep talking about. So we're going to have another 20-minute time of cross-examination. And then, really excitingly, we're going to be able to have a time for Q&A. Now, with the Q&A, there is a QR code up there. You can submit a question and you can choose to say it out loud. Or if that's something you don't want to do, you're allowed to just say, I don't want to do that. And one of our lovely MCs will do that for you. If you are reading a question out, can I encourage you to make it a question and not a 3-minute spiel? We're all very excited and we have lots of thoughts about this debate, but we'd love to hear what our speakers have to think, and you'll get plenty of time to ask them later and share your own opinions. But for the Q&A, make it a short, sharp question that's less than 30 seconds. That is a question. That would be my encouragement to you. Now, without further ado, we might get back onto the discussion, and I'm going to hand it over to the philosophers because I think they had some questions that they wanted to ask the Christians.
Okay, well, I think we'll just you've mentioned a couple times that you don't believe that we are pond scum, as you put it. Is that a denial of evolution, or are you just saying that evolution is a mechanism of God, or what's the stance?
Personally, we don't, well, as a Union Christian, we don't have a stance on that, but that was not a attack on evolution, so to say, but more so our dignity as humans on the basis that there is no God and that there is no objective dignity.
Excellent. Before I ask a question, sorry, that sounded facetious. I'm sorry. That was a good question. It's a good question. In fact, it's such a good question. I would love to talk more with you about, because I know we could go super off into the weeds into it. So I'm going to flag that as well for afterwards. But I realise we've been quite rude to our audience because we haven't actually given a definition of Christianity. We've given out sort of 2 points as to how we're going to support this belief in Christianity, God's real and Jesus Christ rose from the dead. But I don't think we've actually sort of given a roundabout definition of what it is. So in one sentence, God made the world and humans in it to be part of his family and working with him. But humans rebelled. We chose to give God the flick. Now, God chose a certain people, the Jews, through which he was going to they were his special people. They had a number of different laws by which they could be with God, but they couldn't even follow those laws. This is various ceremonial laws we talked about. They couldn't follow those laws. So what happens? Human beings can't be with God, be in relationship with God without God's help himself. So Jesus comes to earth. Jesus dies for our sins, and he rises. In the same way, we can have a new life with Christ if we accept him as our saviour. And if you take home one thing from tonight, I don't want it to be naturalism, free will, like, who cares really? I think people are getting maybe a bit bored with that one, so we'll move on. But one takeaway, let it be that Jesus Christ is real and he rose from the dead, and he wants to reconnect with you. So that's a bit of an explanation of what actually Christianity is.
I mean, again, to go back to the beginning,
I'll let you respond.
This is why I clarified at the beginning the difference between deism and theism, because Lazarus rose from the dead.
But he didn't stay alive after that, though. He died again.
I'm sorry, it's what?
Lazarus.
Wait.
Point was, Lazarus rose from the dead and then died 40, 50, 60 years later. Who's Lazarus? Great question. See, exactly. So, yeah, so maybe we probably shouldn't get too stuck into Isaiah 41 for probably keep it high level for the low level for the audience.
You're drawing a logical conclusion here that the resurrection, miracles necessitate divinity. And the point is that we can provide biblical examples of miracles and resurrections that do not necessarily indicate divinity. You have to provide something else.
Sure, I agree that a miracle doesn't necessarily lead to divinity, and I don't think any of us would deny that. To the question in the audience, who's Lazarus? He's a guy that Jesus resurrected from the dead. But anyways, the question was, why would, if Jesus rose from the dead, how does that lead to the conclusion of divinity? And the answer to that is because Jesus claimed to be God, and then he verified that claim from rising from the dead by his power as God. The difference between Jesus and Lazarus is that Lazarus did not claim to be God, and also that he did not claim to resurrect himself of his own power, from which Jesus did. So the point, the contention is, how do we lead to Jesus being God? And well, the answer is through the resurrection, pointing to the most reasonable explanation for that, based upon his claims in his life. Like, yeah, what's your response to that?
I think my response to that can be found in the speech I gave earlier, which is that you have to first prove that the eyewitnesses that saw not an empty tomb, that saw a resurrected Jesus after the fact that he was entombed in the tomb. You have to prove that there are eyewitnesses that are credible, that can be trusted to give good, accurate testimony. And if your suggestion is that the followers did it because the followers are credible, they uprooted their lives. I already explained lots of Trump supporters do that. They uprooted their lives and traveled to the Capitol to basically incite an insurrection against the United States. So I would like to be very clear on the burden of proof. The burden of proof for you guys in this debate would be to explain for us why Jesus didn't just historically exist, but also was the Son of God. Like he part of the Holy Trinity, and why Christianity's monopoly on truth and morality exists. That's the burden of proof.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much for the fact that we're getting on to the resurrection. And I think a lot of people here just want to hear that and how that verifies Christianity's truth. But my response to that, well, I find your comparison between the Capitol and Jesus's resurrection very interesting. Mostly because the Capitol isn't related to this at all. I know you're kind of drawing the point, well, he had followers, well, if they followed him and really believed it, and I don't know, but that has no bearing on our argument here today about the disciples. The disciples weren't just random adherents to some president, but the disciples were people who lived with Jesus and lived with him all their lives. And then as a response to the resurrection of Jesus Christ, their lives were radically transformed. And now with your Capitol example, we don't have the lives of Trump supporters being radically transformed of some sort. No, but with the disciples, they claimed to have seen the risen Jesus. Their lives were transformed from being timid people to then people of courage. And they went to their deathbed on this knowledge, being tortured, being executed, being all these sorts of hardships, and they never recanted. And so my question to you is, what best explains the evidence of the disciples about Jesus's resurrection?
Human, imperfect. It's the very human, imperfect processing of information. And I just want to put this out very clearly. But if you think about it, that is the same logic that is repeated in documentaries about jihadists, right? Like when your family members sit down with each other and discuss, oh, what happened? Why did they go to Syria or Iraq and join ISIS? The response has always been, well, they seem so mild, and now they got so emboldened and so brave to go be a foreign fighter for ISIS. Like the reason why I draw the comparison for QAnon and the Capitol riots is very simple. It's the methodology of the reasoning presented in that 12-minute speech earlier from him. But more importantly, I would just want to also point out that he seems to be trying to make a distinction between being a follower of a political movement and being a disciple of the Christ. I just have something very. Do you all consider, like, if you're Christian, do you consider yourself a disciple of Christ? Yes, right?
Correct.
Yeah, but if that's the case, you don't live with Jesus.
Yeah, we don't live with Jesus, but the difference is the disciples were, well, a disciple is a title for the followers of Christ. And so it has two definitions, both the regular followers, but also the 12 disciples or 12 apostles. But regardless of that, we're not going to get into semantics of disciples.
Something. So
I haven't answered this question, but sure.
So in clarifying, when you say that you sort of appeal to the disciples of Jesus, you're basically saying that people that already believed that Jesus was divine testified to Jesus being divine. Is that what you're saying?
Sorry, what was your question?
So what is a disciple of Jesus? What does that mean?
Look, a disciple of Jesus is a follower, but I think we're getting into the semantic game.
No, it's not semantics. What you just said is that the people that already believe in the divinity of Jesus believe in the divinity of Jesus.
No, these people did not believe in the divinity of Jesus.
How were they disciples?
Before they knew about God, before they knew about Jesus being God, they did not believe in the divinity of Jesus, but their views were radically transformed as his disciples from the basis of his resurrection. And we have someone who went from a skeptic, who went from an unbeliever and a Jew to being a believer from the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that person, well, we've got two. We've got Paul, one of the people I brought. Yeah, sure.
So I'll clarify, because obviously the existence of Christianity as distinct from Judaism is the fact that some people said this is the Messiah, right? Judaism declares very clearly there is going to be a Messiah. There's a prophecy for that Messiah. So there was an entire group of people that went, met, talked, lived, listened to Jesus, and they declared very emphatically, he is a false prophet, he is a liar, and he is not an actual divine figure. This is still, by the existence of the Jewish faith, something that they adhere to just as rigorously as you do. So if you want to appeal to eyewitness accounts, you have to appeal to the corollary examples.
Excellent. I want to address sort of the big picture misunderstanding, I think, that's catching us up. We're not arguing that Jesus rose from the dead because some people who heard about it, they choose to die for that belief. Right? That's not what we're arguing. Because, like the point about jihad, people were changed radically. And that's not what we're talking about. Eyewitnesses to events, people who would have known whether it was true or not, whether Jesus rose from the dead. These are not people, as Daniel said, it's not Chinese whispers. It's yes or no, I saw it. And the reason we asked the question, which I don't think someone answered actually, I'll give you the credit. You said it was human misunderstanding and human imperfection. The reason we asked the question, what's your alternate theory, is because all the alternate theories fall flat, right? You gave the explanation of they wanted to believe it. So then why was there an empty tomb? If they just wanted to believe it, if they hallucinated it, why was there an empty tomb? If your explanation were different, if it were, well, the disciples moved the body, well then why would they die for something they know to be a lie? I'm not talking about something they think is true. They know it's a lie.
Well, so
again, I'll repeat.
They think it's true.
If they move the body, they know Jesus did not rise from the dead.
Again,
so I'll return to the question that Daniel posed. What is your theory, historical hypothesis, you could call it, to explain the four facts Daniel presented?
Again, here's the issue. If you want to provide evidence from testimony by people that were present that agree that Jesus was a divine figure,
sure,
there is an entire religious faith that denies that was true.
Sure.
So again, this isn't even a debate of Christianity versus non-Christianity. It's just a disagreement between Christianity and Judaism from its distinctions in eyewitness accounts. So if you want to appeal to them, sure, but then you just have to basically evaluate which one was correct, and you have to appeal to something other than eyewitness anyway.
Well, we're not only appealing to eyewitness accounts, as we've got four.
Well, then actually, let me come to that then, because
Sure, I'll let you.
when you're talking about the existence, for instance, I'm going to appeal to my genealogy here and pull out Mormonism. People saw Joseph Smith writing out the entirety of the Book of Mormon from his mind. That's documented in American history. So how could he have done that? How could he have written out these whole books? How could he have gone to this whole level? And again, after somebody ripped them up, after he had done it the first time, he did it again. How could this be explained through anything other than God?
So I think it would be really helpful for the audience if you could go through fact by fact, because you've mentioned the disciples' eyewitness as something which doesn't necessarily point to the resurrection. Can you, with your alternate theory of what happened, fact by fact, 1, 2, 3, 4, explain them by your theory? Because I've heard sort of one here, one there, and I still don't think we've had a straight answer to the question, what's your historical hypothesis for these 4 facts we presented? Because ours makes sense of them. Do you have one?
Well, I think there's a false dilemma here, which is the idea that in order for us to criticize the legitimacy of your view, we need to posit a better view in just all of the broad terms. We need to provide for objective morality. We need to explain how these things happen. That's just not accurate. The reality is that you can point to any positive argument for any religion and you end up in the same position. How can you deny the moral teachings of Joseph Smith? How can you deny Hinduism? How can you deny all these things when there's so many testimonies that support these religions?
I appreciate that response. To answer that, I don't believe the historic evidence for these other religions are as robust. In fact, a lot of them are more hearsay. For instance, Buddhism, 400 years after there's revelation or things from him. From Mormonism, there is no grounding of hundreds of disciples who clearly saw him rise. But regardless of that, I know we're going a bit off topic.
The evidence of Judaism is exactly
the point
the
was,
same.
sorry, do you mind if I just continue? Thank you very much. The 4 points of what we're arguing today as a evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and I don't feel you've answered those 4 points to the right degree. You've pointed out what about these other religions, but that does not account for the fact that Jesus was a real person and died. Jesus's disciples believed this and died for it. That Paul was an advocate for Judaism and hated Christians, and yet he was completely transformed after claiming to see the risen Christ. And finally, the empty tomb. Now, if you go with all these, you've talked about Mormonism, but that hasn't answered these objections. And so I'm going to ask you this. As a skeptic, as an atheist, what best explains these 4 historic facts? Because I personally believe the resurrection best explains it, but what best explains these 4 historic? I would love to hear it.
I want to put it out there that I find it a bit strange because there's a bit of an inconsistency with the claims they are making. The first is, I think Patrick tries to kind of dissociate himself or try to refocus their case by saying that, we don't mean that just because lots of people believed it, therefore it is true. But I think it is quite evident from the response we saw there and also from his 12-minute speech earlier that I think the other speaker there believes that just because a whole bunch of people said these things and had a very strong conviction, therefore their historical testimonies deserve more credibility. But that doesn't tell us why those beliefs and testimonies are empirically true. What they've proven is that many people believe that that he rose from the dead. They believe that the explanation for the empty tomb was his resurrection. But equally, other people have reason to believe, like what Patrick points out, the theory that his disciples carried his body away so that they could retain a monopoly over morality and truth. That is a theory, a conspiracy theory for God's sake, by Christian standards. But the point is that their formulation is this. They believe those people's testimonies because those people are changed by Christ, and you see Christ living through those people in those changes. But they've never drawn us a clear causal empirical link that proves that this proves that Christianity whatever it says, Jesus's resurrection actually happened. Like it doesn't prove anything. It just proves people's lives and behaviors were changed. It doesn't prove a causal link there. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I appreciate that. So to that, no, in fact, I think it does prove, or at least it shows with reasonable evidence, that if there are these 4 points in history where hundreds of people's lives are radically transformed at the response of the resurrection, and not only radically transformed, but they change their views completely, which they disagree with, I don't think there's much else which can explain it. And I don't think the opponents today have presented any other alternative hypothesis which has been sufficient. In fact, all I've seen is that they've been to us and saying, well, this point doesn't really work, or this point doesn't work, or the reason why your fact number 3 doesn't work. No, but they have not presented any positive evidence in response to us. And so for the 3rd time today, I really mean it. I want actual positive evidence to show why our facts are wrong and a better explanation for them, because this is how you do the historic.
Thanks, guys. Excellent discussion. What we're going to do is, it's come to 18 minutes. I'm mindful of time, and I'd love to hear from the audience. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to give you guys 20 seconds to think. You guys get the first Q&A. You get 1 question to ask the other team, and you get 2 minutes to respond. So what's your burning question that you need the other team to answer? So I'll give you a bit of time to think about it. I feel like Joel's got one. Do you have one for your side? Yeah. Yeah, go for it. Joel's got his question.
just because some things are unexplainable does not mean that the Son of Man rose from the dead, right? Like, by that same vein, we do not understand how the Egyptians were able to really construct the pyramids. In Egypt history, ancient Egyptian history, we have seen works of miracles, right? People being cured immediately and things like that. So my question here is, if your test is people believe in these things, and also there's a positive evidence here that we have hypothesized, and that we have a burden of proof to prove a different theory here, then can you explain to us why Egyptians were able to build the pyramids? And if you don't believe that, and you're not able to give me a theory, then it must mean the Egyptian priests were able to magic it out of thin air. Yeah.
Okay, so Joel's question is, please explain how the Egyptian pyramids were built. So I'll caution our speakers to model good responses of how they'd love the audience to be asking them questions. So for the Christians, please keep it short for your question as well. So can you give us a 2-minute reply to Joel's burning question?
Yeah, certainly. So the point Joel's making is that they don't have to provide an alternative because the question is Christianity true? It's not. What's the real answer? They just have to disprove ours. Now, it's sort of akin to them saying, we don't have to prove that 1 + 1 equals. So, let's say we were arguing 1 + 1 = 3, and you would say, well, I don't know what it equals, but it doesn't equal 3. That's valid. You wouldn't have to tell me it equals 2. But we're not talking about a bare fact here. That's what the pyramids are. So we're not talking about something, just a fact that exists by itself, like 1 + 1 = 2. We're talking about an expansive worldview. So, for example, if you were to remove the Christian worldview, you'd have to replace it with something. You can't opt out of a worldview. There's no such thing as a neutral worldview. This is how you make sense of things. That's what, the sum of your beliefs, how you make sense of things. There's no neutral worldview. So what we've been asking is, what are you going to replace it with? Because it can't be naturalism, right? We've agreed that that actually explains things poorly. We're asking, I think that's the point I'm making. So we don't have to, you do actually have to provide something here.
Sure, you could believe any other.
My question?
I'm so sorry. Yeah, well, just a quick question.
Sorry, I'm sure there were many things I said that just
thanks.
You want to get on. Short question. Earlier, you guys agreed that there is an objective moral standard. Do you think that standard is hollow and there are no consequences? If not, what happens when you break that moral standard? So let me actually, sorry, Josh. You agree there's an objective moral standard. What happens when you break that?
So you have two questions there. The first is, what is the alternative worldview to the Christian worldview? The answer is there are many other religious worldviews about the origin of humanity and the creation of morality and things like that. If you're asking for an account for the empty tomb and what happened to Jesus's body, I've told you there are different explanations out there, but we have no reason to believe that the Bible's answer is the truest answer possible. We've already explained why the methodology doesn't work. But the second response to the question that they asked was, the second question they asked is basically, well, like, what happens if you violate objective morality? By Christian standards, the answer is you basically join Mr. S.A. Tan in hell. But what I would point out is when you basically think an impure thought, that's also you violating morality by their standards as well, right? But like the point is that we accepted that objective morality existed because we wanted to forward the discussion a little bit more. But there are so many arguments to suggest that morality isn't objective, right? We are being tactically charitable by accepting some premises so that we are reasonable in the engagement across the debate. But I think what's happened here is a bit of an exploitation of that charitability in engaging, right? And I think the response that we have basically there is objective morality probably doesn't exist. We have good reasons to believe that. If you want to have a discussion about that, we're happy to do it. It's just that we're trying to move the discussion a little bit along to go on to more important areas of discussions and clash.
Thank you guys for discussion. And we'll now be doing some Q&A time. I apologise if I pronounce your names wrong. First question is from Faze, is that correct? Yep. A mic will run up to you, Faze. Yep. He's up there in the middle. Could you also tell me which side you prefer to answer the question mainly? Yep. Flick the switch, yep.
Testing, is this? Yeah. So unfortunately, most of my questions are for the Christian side. I have to say, my first question, though, is more general. So, sorry, my first question is for the philosophy side, actually. So I'm wondering, when's the Islam debate?
Faze, I might get you to ask the question you had about the proper documentation. I think
Right. Sure thing.
Thank you.
So I was wondering, now this one's for the Christian side. So after 2,000 years, during a time with no proper documentation technology, after having it translated multiple times, again and again, even in the same language, and after spanning multiple continents, you may say Christianity is true, but how confident are you that the Christianity that you think is true today is the same Christianity that existed all the way back when Jesus was here?
Sorry, I was looking at my paper because I wanted to find a stat for you, not because I was ignoring you. So what was your name?
My name is
Faiz. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your question. That's really important because I think there's a bit of a misconception going around that what this is someone wrote something down 2,000 years ago, and then a little bit, and it was written, 200 years after the fact by a different person who didn't see it. It was just hearsay, and then that was copied by someone, and we've got some fragments of it, and they filled in pieces along the way, and then they keep translating. It's been translated so many times. That's not the case on any of the points I mentioned. So firstly, on the point, happened 2,000 years ago. So what was written by eyewitnesses to other eyewitnesses in many cases. And we don't have, a couple of fragments here and there. We have over 5,700 partial or complete pieces of, it's like on papyrus or it's on various things, copies of the Bible, of the New Testament, copies of the New Testament. And like compare that to the evidence we have for another historical figure, like say Julius Caesar. We've got more evidence for Christ than for Julius Caesar, if you really want to look at it. Or, we all believe that Socrates and Plato existed. How much evidence do we have for them? How many copies less than 100 of any of their works, far less than 100. So to say that Jesus didn't exist is actually preposterous. And on the final point, has it been copied and copied again? No, actually, whenever someone does a new translation of the Bible, so this is a 2011 translation, what they did is they went back to the original Greek. They didn't go to the King James and update the modern language. They went back to the original. So what we actually have is incredibly accurate. And you look at all those different fragments that I mentioned, 5,700, they're all incredibly consistent. There's minor variations, but in spelling or expression, but none of them affect the meaning. So does that answer your question?
Thanks. Yep, I think that's helpful. Next question, James is reading one out. James is the president of the Philosophy Society. I think he's got a question.
All right, so this one's it's kind of two questions combined. It's for you guys. So why do you think the original goal of God's creation, an intelligent designer, is just to only have the purpose of creating us? Why do you think that there wasn't a purpose for those infinite billions of planets and galaxies? How does you deeming the creator to be wasteful deny its existence?
Oh, is that for us? Or...
No, that's for MPS.
Okay.
Yep. Because a lot of the Bible, or a lot of the way Christianity predicates itself on, is that we have the answers for existence, origin, meaning, and nowhere in the Bible does it say anything about that other universe out there. But more importantly, more critically, the Bible is actually written in a way that is very I would say very human-centric, which is to say that it's written in a way that suggests very largely that the purpose of all beings in the universe, or all sentient human beings in this case, is to glorify God's creation, right? But it's a bit circular logic, right? To also just impose on us, or impose on anyone for that matter, that the existence of those planets and the vastness of the galaxy is a proof of God's wonder and awe. The problem with that line of reasoning is that it presupposes that basically God exists, and his entire purpose of creating the universe was to basically glorify his power and his might. And if that's the case, then his goodness comes from the fact that he's the most powerful being in the world? Surely not, right? The idea of an intelligent design, therefore, and the reason why we contended with this, especially in my speech earlier, was to prove that the intelligent design argument, if we accept it exists, seems to point towards a designer that is quite happy to sit by and watch genocide happen. It seems a bit problematic that way. Not sure how we can ever moralize why the intelligent designer sees it that way, which is why I think Christianity largely relies on the argument about how God works in higher ways. Basically, the arguments that our learned friends here have posited, which is God works in 10D while we work in 3D, and
Thanks, Joel.
Yeah.
I might just pass on because what you said at the end relates to our next question. Oscar Chung, I believe, was happy to read out a question for the Christian Society. Oscar, are you here? Yeah. Up the back. Sorry, Edwin. That's all right.
Bit of a
round of applause for Edwin. Yeah.
This is towards Christian Union. If God is all good and all powerful, then how do you reconcile that with suffering existing in the world?
Thanks, Oscar. I'll try to be brief, but I'm going to split this into two categories, really, the response to this question, because there's a logical component to it, and there's also an emotional one. We'll start with the logical. If God is all loving, how can he be all good? Suffering exists. This question kind of smuggles in a number of other unfounded claims. So one, if God is all powerful, he would prevent all evil. But if God gives us free will, well, that also includes the opportunity to do evil. If God, made all things good, that wouldn't be free will. And that's not a limit on God's power. That doesn't mean he's not all powerful. That all powerful doesn't mean can do logical impossibilities. Now, on the second point, God is, if he's all loving, he would never allow evil. Again, smuggling another premise. Is that the case? What if, for example, there were some temporary evil that resulted in an eternal good? So, and then on the so that's the logical response, and it sort of runs the risk of sounding a bit calloused, and that's why I want to move on to the emotional one, because if someone has had pain and they come to you with this question, how could God allow this? I'm not going to respond with that. I'm going to respond with, I'm so sorry that's happened to you. And can I just say that God feels your pain? Can I just say that God is not up here above the universe, doesn't want to be part of you, that he came to earth and died for your pain so that you could be with him and have life with him? And that Christianity actually provides you the ways of thinking about this pain, of dealing with it. The naturalist view of the universe, what Dawkins was saying, there's no good, no evil. You just got to sit in that pain, accept it. That natural awfulness, you just got to deal with that. Whereas Christianity says that's not natural. That feeling you feel in your heart, this thing's wrong, I don't like it, that's right, because you're made by a spiritual being who doesn't want you to sit in that pain. So that's those two parts to the question, the logical and the emotional. Hope that answers it. Thanks, Oscar.
The next question is from Isabel. Isabel, if you just put your hand up. Isabel, are you here? If not, we can skip Isabel. Sorry? Nope. That's a good question. Maybe, James, would you like to read out? Because I think it's for MPS. Is that okay? Yep.
All right, so this question's for you guys. Isabel asks, I'm assuming that all of us believe that all humans are not perfect. So is it fair to judge Christians and what they believe based on a relatively small group of representatives, i.e. related to Catholics and Nazis?
Again, if you want to appeal to historic checks and balances of the good committed by Christians and the evil committed by Christians, or evil committed by secularists, or whatever you want to do, that you're going to end up sort of just with a numerical kind of sheet. And you could do that if you like. But I think the point is more so that when we're appealing to Christianity as a worldview, the assumption is that, oh, well, it can help us be good people and it can help us get closer to the life of Jesus and his teachings. And the issue is that when you look at the actual lives of Christians over history, they have struggled as much to do that as any other religion, as any humanist secularist. They have struggled to be good people in exactly the same way, and they have resulted in some good, some bad. So what we're doing here, when we're talking about the fact that the Nazis had coalitions and pacts with, the Catholic Church or the Crusades, or we appeal to all these things, it's just to say, you're presenting a worldview as though it pushes us forward to be better people, and history just doesn't reflect that.
I might just ask a quick clarification question. So I think what Isabel was maybe trying to get at is, can you determine the truthfulness of Christianity based on the adherence of its followers?
No, and just in the same way, you can't determine the legitimacy of Christianity by appealing to the existence of Jesus and his resurrection. You can't say, yeah, it's a non sequitur.
I think that question itself, I think, is a bit misleading in that it's not just relatively small groups of people. And the reason why we engage with this is because, and the reason why we use this metric of judging Christians by their actions is really because the only way God shows his goodness, and the only way Christ's sacrifice on the cross makes any sort of moral redemption in any sense, is if we can see God's acts and his goodness through you guys. And that's the idea of living the Christian life. And so obviously we are expected to judge Christians based on what Christians are doing. The question that they're asking, which is, should you judge Christianity and its truth based on the worst excesses of a small group of people? The answer is yes, we can. Firstly, because that's the internal measure that Christianity itself imposes within its structure. But secondly, I think we've correctly pointed out that it's not just a small group of people. There's a list of massive structures that consolidated power through Christianity, right? And they basically were, in the case of the Nazis, that happened, but also in the current world that we live in, like the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has been known to basically use its grassroots volunteers and mobilized basically towards suppressing a lot of the claims about pedophilias and about pedophiles, sorry. And so it's not just a one isolated incident or a small group of people, but furthermore, there has been in recent times, I'm very sure all of you would know, but Christianity is one of the biggest religious organizations out there right now with a massive following, right? And that following has been a massive supporter base in the United States of America. Evangelical America is massive, and they espouse so many hateful and bigoted views. I'm not saying that Christians are inherently that way, but if we were to take the own yardstick for whether Christianity is true and whatever it stands for is right, we look back to the teachings that Jesus himself said in the Gospels, right? When you look at the fruit of a teaching and you know whether or not the tree is good or not.
Thanks, guys. I might throw it over to you guys to respond to that question because I think there will be good crossover. And then we've got one last question from Lewis Stone. So I'll just get you to respond to that claim.
First, to anyone who's gone through something as a result of someone who claims to be a believer, I apologize. I know a lot of friends and I know a lot of people who have gone through a lot of pain because people have claimed, well, I love God, and then done something terribly, terribly atrocious. So yeah, I just want to apologize for that. But I also want to say our definition of goodness in Christianity isn't something that you can create through just loving other people and doing those things, but it's girded in a love for God too. So the idea that you can be moral without God, or that these Christians aren't really different, detracts from the main point of the summation of Jesus's two commandments, which is the summation of the law. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, the atheists can't do that because, well, they reject God, and they reject who he is and what he's done for them. But additionally, although Christians aren't perfect, there is an improvement in their lives, and there are many great things that Christians have done. And we can see a lot of the hospitals under Christian organizations. We can see a lot of the scientific improvements or improvements in medicine under the Enlightenment era. And so we can see a lot of the changes as a result of knowing Christ in the lives of Christians. And so I urge you not to just look at it from a skeptical lens of, oh, look at all those bad things they've done, but also look at the good things they've done. And not only the good things, but look at their change in their life. If they're truly a follower of Christ, their hearts are going to be transformed. And even though they're not perfect, Christ was perfect on their behalf, and he took the price of our own sinfulness on the cross. And so that's our solace. But I urge you all to look at not what Christians do and how good Christians are at the end of the day as a determination of Christianity. But look at Jesus Christ. There was nothing wrong with him. You can look at his life with a microscope. You're not going to find a problem. But yeah, I really appreciate it. And I'm sorry if anyone's gone through any faith-based abuse. And I urge you to consider Christ and not just the people who claim Christ. Thank you.
final questions from Lewis, and it's a question for both sides, and I think it'll be a charitable way to end our discussion tonight. Thank you, Lewis.
Hey guys, this question's for both sides. So what is the strongest piece of evidence the other side has presented for their claim? Thanks.
Don't rush into it. Yeah.
I thought the point they made on we need to prove Christianity.
Okay, I'm going to throw it over. Who should I throw it over to? To CU, given that what the topic is tonight. So, would you like to go first?
Yes, that would be good. Yeah, what I've appreciated about their main good point tonight was they tried to show the fact that I find it interesting, the fact that you can still be loving without Christianity, at least to your neighbor. I found that a bit compelling, and it draws into question, well, if you don't need Christ to be loving, then what's the point? But I also ask that it just doesn't involve loving your neighbor, it involves loving your God too. So that's kind of my point to it. But I appreciated that, and it did make sense. So yeah, thank you.
I liked that Joel kept calling us learned. Appreciated that.
XD. So I think the most compelling argument for us was, okay, maybe not you. I think the most compelling argument for me was the argument about the existence of, I guess, like morality, whether or not morality just developed over time versus whether or not someone had to create that source of morality. I think that was a very compelling argument for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say that I think even just in putting forward your argument and talking about these things and evaluating morality, that's like an amazing thing to do in general. And again, appealing to an objective morality, the arguments that you guys presented for human intuitions, I think were really great. Yeah.
Thank you. And I just got to say, I appreciate so much you guys coming out here. I know there was a bit of delays with who the speaker was and all of that, but you guys have just been wonderful, and we really, really, both Patrick and I appreciate everything you've done today. And
Thank you for coming. I'm going to invite our MC, Georgia, to come up and wrap up. And I invite the speakers across the floor and shake hands. That'd be wonderful. Thanks.
Oh, I'd love to.
Well, thank you all for all your questions and for your attention this evening. So that concludes our time from hearing from the debaters. Let's give them another hand. Now, you may have been listening to people talk tonight and thinking, I'd really like to keep discussing and hearing about that. Great. Both Christian Union and Monash Philosophy Society would love it if you got involved. Here to tell us more about Monash Philosophy Society, please welcome back their president, James.
Thank you, Georgia, and thanks to everyone from MCU and from MPS for being here tonight. I realise it's week 11, so we're all probably really struggling with all the assignments and exam prep, but just the fact that so many of you are here tonight really means a lot to all of us here. So thanks, guys. Now, I wouldn't blame most of you if until recently you hadn't maybe heard of Monash Philosophy Society. Maybe when word first got out about this debate, you were maybe thinking, oh, okay, I didn't realise there was a philosophy club. Well, yes, there is. We've been around for a little while, but it's honestly really only been in the last year that we've really made some great strides. So to tell you a little bit more about what we do. Next slide, please. Oh, wait. So, yep, thank you. We offer, sorry, could you just go back one? Yep, thank you. Sorry, guys. Oh, no, what too many. All right, thank you. So, just to give you a little taste of what we do, we also meet weekly. We have weekly discussion events, which we call Philosophy and Tea. Now, you can probably gather from that what we do. We talk about philosophy and drink a lot of tea. So, if you enjoyed the tea tonight, then you'll get plenty more where that came from. If you if you come along to our events, and we have biscuits too. So just add a little bit more to it there. But yeah, so we meet weekly. We maybe pick a topic. I mean, philosophy is pretty broad. We might discuss something similar to what we did tonight, but you can range across a variety of different topics: logic, metaphysics, knowledge, ethics. Yeah, that too. So yeah, there's a lot there, and we always encourage our members to suggest topics of their own as well. And the best thing about it is you don't have to have a formal background in philosophy. Just a keen interest and curiosity is really all that we ask for. It's we try to create a very welcoming environment where everyone has a voice and where they can share their ideas freely and to challenge their ideas and get some exciting discussions going like we had tonight. Look, apart from that, we offer a few other kinds of events. We often invite guest speakers in. Back in August, we had Peter Singer in. Many of you probably would have heard of Peter Singer before. He's often known as the world's most influential living philosopher. So we're very lucky to get him in, and we often invite speakers from within the university and also sometimes from outside of the university to tell you a little bit more about what they research, give you some more insights into some different areas of philosophy, and it gives you an opportunity to get to know them and some of the research that's going on within the philosophy department at Monash and elsewhere. We often also run fun events, like we recently had a movie night. We sometimes have games nights with like philosophical themes as well. We also had a trivia night recently too. The list goes on and on, but we're always open to new ideas too. Obviously, 2023 isn't too far away now, so if any of you guys want to get involved and you have any ideas for new things, we're always open. Now, you probably might be wondering too, okay, so this sounds interesting, how can I join? So if you'd like to join and become an MPS member, you're welcome to scan the QR code above, or you can contact us at any time via our email or through our link tree. All of our socials are there. You'll find us almost everywhere on Facebook, Discord, Instagram, LinkedIn. So we're not hard to reach anyway. So if you are keen to join, you're welcome to scan the QR code, or otherwise, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. And I will add to every member gets a 10% discount at Joe's, so it's a little extra, as well as a few other perks too. So all I can say is if you enjoyed tonight, hopefully you'll find a lot more where that came from, not only through MCU, of course, but through getting involved with MPS too. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, James. And now the Christian Union would like to welcome up the Christian Union President to tell us more about their club, Jacob York.
Thanks, Georgia. Yes, Georgia said, my name's Jacob. I just want to start by saying thank you. Thanks to Noah and Joel. Thanks, James. Thanks for coming out, Philosophy Society. We're really grateful to have this opportunity to have this public debate, to have this public conversation to consider, is Christianity true? So thank you so much for your time. Thanks again for all of you as well for coming out. I also want to share a little bit about what CU, Christian Union, is all about. CU exists on campus because we want people to consider taking a fresh look at who Jesus is. And we heard a lot about tonight, we considered that question, didn't we, of is Christianity true? And there's lots of views out there, but CU exists because we believe what the Bible says about Jesus is true. We believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and we believe that Jesus changes everything. So if you look up there on the screen, you'll see a QR code. If you want to get involved more, that'll take you to our club's website. You can also contact us or get involved through our Facebook page. We hold weekly events. We hold small groups that explore Jesus' life, what he did, because that's the center of Christianity, Christ, Jesus. That's what we're looking at. Small groups that explore who Jesus is and what he did. We run weekly Bible talks during semester camps, social events, that sort of thing. And we also catch up with people in small groups, in one-on-one, anyone who has questions, who wants to discuss things more, who has doubts about Christianity or Jesus. That's something that we do as well. And so if that's you tonight, then we're really grateful that you've come. We're really grateful that you're here. And we're really eager to keep having that conversation with you. So that QR code is up there. And yeah, we'd encourage you to keep thinking through what you've heard tonight and check out CU and check out Jesus. Thanks.
Thanks, Jacob. Now on the screen, you're going to see a feedback/follow-up form, a QR code to take you to there. So we'd encourage you guys to scan that, please, if you're able to. If you scan that, which we hope you do, it will take you to a Google form where you can give feedback on the debate. We would just love it if you guys could tell us what parts you enjoyed, so we can improve and know what went well for future events so that we can host many more of these sorts of things and really get thinking. In this form, you'll also have the opportunity to get connected into both clubs, as James and Jacob both talked about. So I'd encourage you guys to scan those. So if you like to keep learning and discussing what we just talked about tonight or other things that we heard about from the presidents, would encourage you to fill out that section of the form as well. We hope that tonight's debate really got you thinking and that you enjoyed hearing from both sides and from each other. Tonight would not have been possible without hard work from so many people. I'd like to give a big thank you to our debaters and our moderator for tonight. Let's give them a hand. They have all put in so much work to make this debate happen, both tonight and over the past semester. And I'd also like to thank both clubs for their willingness to engage in this conversation, and all of you again for coming here tonight. Now, while the official proceedings are done for the evening, would encourage you not to run off just yet. Still have questions or want to have more conversations? That is great. Look around. We are in a lecture theatre full of people who are interested in having these sorts of conversations, who have questions, who have heard the debate. So I'd encourage you all to stick around and talk with the people you came here tonight with, people that you've just met, people that you're going to meet over tea and coffee, and to ask those questions and to have those conversations. We'd encourage you guys to listen to each other's points of view and to ask yourself even how your views have been challenged or changed after tonight, and discuss that with those around you as well. In the foyer, you'll find tea and coffee, and we hope lots of fun and interesting conversations. Thank you for joining us tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening.